Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Guilty. 3 weeks after the start of a trial that was watched around the world, a jury of 12 Hennepin County residents delivered their verdict on the 3 counts against former police officer Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd last May by kneeling on his neck for 9.5 minutes. Judge Peter Cahill read the unanimous verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty.
Jurors deliberated for just over 10 hours before delivering their guilty verdicts. Judge Cahill revoked Chauvin's bail and will sentence him in 8 weeks. He faces up to 40 years in prison for the most serious charge, second-degree murder. It's the first time a white officer has been found guilty of murdering a person of color in Minnesota. An NPR investigation found police officers have shot and killed at least 135 black men and women across the United States since 2015. At least 3/4 of those officers were white. On the streets of Minneapolis and around the country, protesters greeted the news with joy, relief, and vows to keep fighting. George Floyd's murder last May set off a global movement for racial justice and against police brutality. George Floyd's brother, Philonise Floyd, responded to the verdict at a news conference with other family members and civil rights leaders.
I'm going to put up a fight every day because I'm not just fighting for George anymore. I'm fighting for everybody around this world. Yeah. I get calls, I get DMs, people from Brazil, from Ghana, from Germany, everybody, London, Italy, they're all saying the same thing. We won't be able to breathe until you're able to breathe. Oh, that's right. Today, we are able to breathe again. Oh, yeah.
After headlines, we'll spend the rest of the hour on the historic verdicts and the reactions they have garnered. Protests broke out in Columbus, Ohio, Tuesday night after a police officer fatally shot a black teenage girl. 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant was reportedly in an altercation with 2 people, and police claimed they thought she was going to stab someone before an officer shot her 4 times. The unnamed officer has been put on leave. She was killed shortly before Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murdering George Floyd. Ma'Khia Bryant had been staying at a foster home. Her mother, Paula Bryant, spoke to a local news channel about the last time she saw her daughter.
We hugged each other. She said, "Mommy, I made honor roll." And she said, "Mommy, I'm looking forward to coming home." Ma'Khia had a motherly nature about her. She promoted peace. And that's something that I want to always be remembered.
A judge has denied a motion to toss the 20-year prison sentence of former police officer Michael Slager, who murdered unarmed black motorist Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Slager tried to argue that his defense was ineffective, but the federal judge ruled, quote, "A careful review of this entire tragic episode makes plain that Slager has no one to blame for his present predicament and sentence but himself. What sealed his fate was his own willful act of shooting an unarmed man in the back 5 times as he ran for his life," the judge said. In international news, India has hit a grim new coronavirus milestone with over 2,000 deaths in a day and close to 300,000 new cases. Hospitals are running low on oxygen and available beds amidst the devastating surge. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said India is facing a coronavirus storm, but is resisting another nationwide lockdown, calling instead for regional lockdowns. Meanwhile, the former king and queen of Nepal have tested positive for COVID-19 after attending the religious festival of Kumbh Mela in the northern Indian city of Haridwar, which has drawn millions of pilgrims in recent weeks. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador received his first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine Tuesday after weeks of mixed messages over whether he would get inoculated. He previously said he would not get the shot as he believed his January infection gave him sufficient COVID-19 antibodies. AMLO has come under fire for his response to the pandemic, including his refusal to issue a mask mandate or even wear one himself on many occasions. Mexico's official death toll is 213,000, the third highest in the world, but officials said last month the true number could be 60% higher. Here in the United States, the State Department's updating its travel advisories to recommend avoiding travel to 80% of the countries of the world because of coronavirus risks. Johnson & Johnson is resuming its rollout in Europe after the European Union drugs regulator said the vaccine may be linked to extremely rare blood clots, but that its benefits far outweigh its risks. The European regulator said the vaccine should carry a warning. It will be up to individual EU countries to decide whether and how to distribute the J&J vaccine. On Friday, a panel for the Centers for Disease Control will meet to make recommendations on its use in the U.S., which has been temporarily halted. New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey reintroduced their Green New Deal resolution Tuesday, over 2 years after it was first unveiled. It now has over 100 co-sponsors in the House. The plan would overhaul U.S. infrastructure, investing in clean energy, and creating 20 million union jobs. This is Ocasio-Cortez at a news conference on Capitol Hill.
We're going to transition to a 100% carbon-free economy that is more unionized, more just, more dignified, and guarantees more health care and housing than we ever have before. That's our goal. That's the goal of a Green New Deal. What we're going to do is going to make sure that communities like Flint, Baltimore, the South Bronx, St. Louis, rural communities whose infrastructure was never properly built in the first place are first in line to rectify the injustices of the past.
Meanwhile, President Biden is expected to announce plans to cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions at least in half by 2030, nearly doubling the target the U.S. committed to under the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Biden has convened an international climate summit with world leaders, which will kick off Thursday, Earth Day. In Chad, the son of the late President Idriss Deby, Mohammed Idriss Deby, has been named interim head of state by a military council after his father died, reportedly while visiting frontline soldiers as they battled a rebel advance in the north of the country. The army has also enacted a nationwide curfew and announced Chad's land and air borders will be shut down. Rebel forces threaten to move towards the capital, prompting fears of further unrest. Idriss Deby had been in power for over 30 years and was just announced the winner of a recent presidential election before his death. Rights groups are calling for a quick transition to democratic civilian rule and an accounting of human rights abuses under Deby's reign. A new report by Reporters Without Borders says journalists in over 100 countries have been blocked from reporting on the coronavirus pandemic and other stories or retaliated against for their work. In its annual report on press freedom, the group also highlighted attacks on U.S. journalists by law enforcement while covering racial justice protests last summer. In Pakistan, veteran journalist Absar Alam was shot and wounded Tuesday while on a walk near his home in the capital, Islamabad. Officials have launched an investigation into the attack, which the Pakistani Minister of Information condemned as an assassination attempt. Alam has been a longtime vocal critic of Pakistan's military. Journalists are routinely targeted in Pakistan, with news organizations facing censorship from the military and government. Reporters Without Borders recently ranked Pakistan near the very bottom of 180 countries for press freedom. Over 250 nonprofits, including Oxfam, Save the Children, and the International Rescue Committee, are urging governments around the world to increase aid for hunger relief programs. In a letter addressed to world leaders, the groups warn over 270 million people are facing acute food insecurity, with many, quote, teetering on the very edge of famine due to ongoing conflicts, the climate crisis, systemic inequities, and the pandemic. Oxfam recently noted, quote, only 26 hours of global military spending is enough to cover the $5.5 billion needed to help those most at risk, and called cuts to food aid by wealthy countries, quote, an extraordinary political failure. Back in the United States, the Biden administration has officially backed statehood for Washington, D.C., ahead of a House vote on the issue Thursday. The White House called on Congress to, quote, provide for a swift and orderly transition to statehood for the 700,000 Washington residents who are not fully represented in Congress. The bill is expected to pass the House, but faces an uphill battle in the evenly divided Senate, where it would need 60 votes to overcome a Republican filibuster. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti has proposed a guaranteed basic income pilot program, which would make L.A. the largest U.S. city to run such a program.
This year, Los Angeles will launch the largest guaranteed basic income pilot of any city in America. We have budgeted $24 million to provide $1,000 a month to 2,000 households for an entire year, no questions asked.
Data from a similar initiative in Stockton, California, has shown recipients had greater success in finding employment and improved mental health. Around 1 in 5 people in Los Angeles lives in poverty. Standing Rock water protector Steve Martinez has been released after more than 60 days behind bars for refusing to give testimony to a federal grand jury. Martinez was summoned as a witness in the case of Sophia Wilansky, a water protector whose arm was severely wounded during a police crackdown on anti-pipeline protests in 2016. Prosecutors were attempting to shift blame for Wilansky's injuries from law enforcement to water protectors. The campaign to free Steve Martinez blasted the use of grand juries as a, quote, divisive and cruel tool of repression. And supporters of imprisoned journalist and activist Mumia AbuJamal say he underwent successful heart surgery Monday. AbuJamal got COVID-19 last month and was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, which he attributed to medical neglect and prison conditions. Advocates are demanding he not be shackled to his hospital bed and continue to call for his release. The African-American journalist Mumia AbuJamal is 66 years old and has been imprisoned for nearly 40 years. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I am Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome again to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.